Rich teen spit on a waitress. She didn't know 50 Hells Angels were watching. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Rosie's Diner, a small roadside restaurant just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. The lunch rush had died down, and Sarah Martinez was wiping down tables, her feet aching from another long shift. She'd been working double shifts for weeks, saving every penny she could for her daughter's medical bills. What she didn't know was that in the next 10 minutes, her life would change forever, all because of one cruel moment and the unlikely heroes who witnessed it. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives reveal the best in humanity. And what happened that day proved that respect has nothing to do with leather jackets or expensive cars, but everything to do with the content of your character. If stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe to Heartfelt Moments, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories of everyday heroes to light. Now, let's get back to Sarah's story. Sarah had been a waitress at Rosie's for nearly 8 years. Everyone in town knew her as the woman with the warm smile who always remembered your order and asked about your family. She never complained, even though everyone knew she was struggling. Her 12-year-old daughter, Emma, had been diagnosed with leukemia 6 months earlier, and the medical bills were crushing. Sarah's ex-husband had disappeared years ago, leaving her to shoulder everything alone. But she showed up every day with that same gentle kindness, serving coffee and comfort to truckers, families, and travelers passing through. That Tuesday, a cherry red Ferrari pulled into the parking lot, music blasting so loud the windows rattled. Out stepped Brandon Mitchell, 18 years old, wearing designer sunglasses that cost more than Sarah made in 2 months. He was the son of a real estate mogul, home from his first semester at an expensive private college. He strutted into the diner with 2 of his friends, all of them laughing loudly and acting like they owned the place. Sarah greeted them with her usual warmth and seated them in a booth by the window. She brought water and menus, politely explaining the daily specials. Brandon barely looked at her. He was too busy showing his friends something on his phone and making jokes about the diner's vintage decor, which was really just code for old and worn. When Sarah came back to take their order, Brandon ordered a burger, then immediately started criticizing everything. The water wasn't cold enough. The menu was limited. The booth was uncomfortable. Sarah apologized and did her best to accommodate him, even though his friends were snickering at every complaint. She'd dealt with difficult customers before. She could handle this. But what happened next crossed a line no one should ever cross. When Sarah brought out their food, Brandon took one look at his burger and exploded. He claimed it was wrong, even though it was exactly what he'd ordered. Before Sarah could respond, he picked up his drink and threw it at her, the cold soda splashing across her uniform. Then, as she stood there in shock, he leaned forward and spit directly in her face. The diner went silent. Completely silent. Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped her face with her apron. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She quietly turned and walked toward the kitchen, her dignity intact even as her heart shattered. What Brandon didn't notice in his arrogant display was the group of men sitting in the corner booth. 50 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had stopped at Rosie's during a charity ride for children's hospitals. They'd been sitting quietly, enjoying their meal and minding their own business. But every single one of them had just witnessed what happened to Sarah. The president of the chapter, a man named Frank who stood 6'4" with arms covered in tattoos, slowly stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor cut through the silence. One by one, the other bikers stood too, forming a wall of leather and brotherhood. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Brandon finally looked up from his phone and saw 50 of the biggest, toughest-looking men he'd ever seen staring directly at him. The color drained from his face. His friend suddenly found the floor very interesting. Frank walked over to Brandon's table, his boots heavy on the tile floor. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Son, I've been riding these roads for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of things. But I have never seen anyone treat another human being with such disrespect. That woman you just humiliated? She's worth 100 of you. Now you're going to apologize to her properly, and then you're going to leave a tip that shows you understand the value of hard work and human decency." Brandon stammered, trying to find words, but Frank wasn't finished. "And just so you know, we're here raising money for kids with cancer. Kids like that waitress's daughter. So while you're throwing drinks and acting like the world owes you something, there are people out here actually suffering, and people like Sarah holding it all together with grace you couldn't even imagine." The kitchen door opened, and Sarah stepped out, having composed herself. Frank turned to her, his tough exterior melting into genuine kindness. "Ma'am, we all saw what happened, and we want you to know that kind of treatment is unacceptable. You handled that with more class than most people could manage." What happened next brought tears to everyone's eyes. The Hells Angels took up a collection right there in the diner. Every single member contributed. When they presented Sarah with the money, it totaled over $8,000. But they didn't stop there. They made calls to their national network, and within days, their organization had raised over $60,000 for Emma's medical treatment. Brandon, thoroughly humbled and shaking, left a $500 tip and a written apology. His father, when he heard what happened, made a substantial donation to the children's hospital treating Emma and made his son volunteer there for the summer. But the real transformation happened in the community. The story spread, not because of social media, but because people were moved by it. Rosie's Diner became a symbol of something important, that kindness matters, that how we treat people when we think no one is watching defines who we really are, and that sometimes angels wear leather jackets. Sarah still works at Rosie's, though now Emma is in remission. The Hells Angels still stop by on their charity rides, and Sarah always has their coffee ready. And on the wall of the diner, there's a photo of Sarah surrounded by 50 bikers, all of them smiling, a reminder that family isn't always about blood, and heroism doesn't always look the way we expect. The next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance or their job, remember Sarah's story. Remember that the measure of a person isn't found in their bank account or their status, but in how they treat others, especially when those others are simply trying to get through their day with dignity. Kindness is free, but it's also priceless. And you never know who's watching, ready to stand up for what's right.